he's giving it big new boyfriend energy. There's a new present every day. He's love bombing us with messages which show how relatable he is, in contrast with stuff he forgotten about Kia Who.
It's been a very energetic start to his time as Prime Minister, but let's see what our experts think. We have assembled a brilliant expert panel who have been very generous with their time. They're going to stay with us for the next hour. Welcome to the show, Michael Gove, former Conservative Cabinet Minister, now editor of The Spectator, and of course a colleague of mine in the House of Lords. Hello, Michael.
Hi, good evening, Ayesha. Lovely, lovely, lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. Welcome back to the show, Ben Judah. Ben is an author. He's also a former special advisor to David Lammy at the Foreign Office. He writes for The Times and he's a great thinker, particularly on foreign affairs. Hello, Ben.
Well, thank you. That's very kind.
And welcome back to a great friend of the show, Anne McElvoy, journalist and executive producer at Politico. Hello, Anne.
I'm trying to outdo Michael's incredibly ebullient hello.
Yes, I think Michael won that, I have to say. Michael has absolutely won that.
He's by her there.
He's good. That's why we like, he's good value from that point of view. Well, look, Anne, I'm going to start with you. We've got lots to sort of pick through, but just your opening thoughts on week one of Andy Burnham.
Well, it was Starmageddon, wasn't it? The extent to which I think the scale of those ousters by people not only loyal to Starmer, but who had thought, number of people we might name check as we go along, see what other people think, thought that their role was to be loyal to a Labour government under a particular leader. They did find that was the opposite of rewarded. There was a desire, clearly by Andy Burnham and his team, to make very clear that this wasn't an act two of a Starmer government with some changes, including himself. It was going to land as something completely different. You can then, I think, look at the fact that there is now, I think, a bit of shock and trauma going around in Labour about the scale of that, but that's what he did. Then the flurry of announcements, he captured them very well at the top of the show there, Ayesha. And I think what that did was establish pace, a sense of direction, a clear communication style for Andy Burnham, very, very different from Keir Starmer, just much more direct, unbuttoned. And then immediately we pitched into, hang on a minute, is this really, are these things, great as they are, whether it's bus fares or VAT and pubs, is that kind of really the area of the big answers that the country's looking for, or is it the kind of prelogue or prologue, I think is the English, isn't it? Prologue to what the country is really going to need and where he's going to be tested.
And look, we'll get into some of the policies and particularly how they're going to be paid for. But let's continue with our sort of opening thoughts. Ben, what were your thoughts this week from Monday onwards?
My thoughts were that the comms were very Labour focused. They're focused at Labour voters, former and potential and current. They were focused at the party. They were focused at that wider activist base. He's trying to consolidate them behind him. A lot of things that really speak to them, such as rough sleeping, such as Number 10 North, and the really charming blitz of sort of TikTok videos that all have a slightly retro flair to them, including this, very, very nice video that he did with John Healey in the pub rating snacks. I'm just happy that the chatter in my world that I'm picking up that major combat operations might resume from the American side in Iran didn't kick off yesterday. Otherwise, it would have looked a bit odd having a video about crisps in the pub being issued by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor.
Yeah, like scampi fries versus potential sort of boots on the ground. But you're right about that kind of quite folksy, nostalgic vibe in terms of how he's framing his optic about what his sort of Labour plan is. Michael, what were your thoughts? Just looking, particularly, you're a big, very aggressive on the comms, very energetic.
Yes, he's giving it big new boyfriend energy. There's a new present every day. He's love bombing us with messages which show how relatable he is, in contrast with stuff he forgotten about Kia Who. Andy is making sure that we all recognise that he's a wholly different type of politician and leader, someone who's seeking exactly, as Ben pointed out, to form an emotional connection with Labour feeling broadly unloved and its affections having been taken for granted by Keir Starmer. He's reminding Labour supporters why it's good to be Labour, that those parts of the country, those sections, both geographically and socioeconomically, who felt that they were overlooked, are being given the full embrace and affectionate treatment. So both, exactly as Ben says, number 10 North, the resetting of the government with both a more northern accent and a northern location, but also those interventions which are designed to deal with the concerns that he both encountered and sought to respond to in the Makerfield by-election. The problem he has is that the bills for all of these gifts will come due in due course. And the sting in the tail earlier in the week, not the tail, but the sting earlier in the week, was the reminder from the departing Darren Jones that the unfunded nature of these promises will create challenges for him.
And Michael, what did you think of the appointment of John Healey and some of the big returns, particularly Angela Rayner in your old department?
So I think the appointment of John Healey was shrewd, but also I suspect that it was a splitting of the difference. I suspect that having looked at Ed Miliband and Ed Miliband's undoubted abilities, there was fear that Ed Miliband's appointment would signal too much of a left-wing hue for the government. Having sought to persuade Shabana Mahmood to take on the role, and Shabana Mahmood being reluctant, I think that he concluded that it wasn't worth the additional effort to entice her into the post, given the pushback that there might be from the soft left of the party. John Healey, because he's broadly liked, well, certainly at the moment, across the Labour Party, was a safer choice. And of course, he has direct Treasury experience as well from the Brown government. And when he resigned as Defence Secretary on a point of principle, that won him plaudits across the political spectrum. So that insulates him, at least initially, from any of the antagonism or, personal sort of bite that there might have been if either Shabana Mahmood or Ed Miliband had been appointed. Angela Rayner's return, I think, is both natural. It was a role that she enjoyed being in that department, but it also itself contains within it a challenge as well, because as she herself acknowledged, when she was being interviewed on Friday, the 1.5 million housing target that she proclaimed when she was first in the role is now even more difficult to meet, and it's been stretched by the commitment on council houses that Andy Burnham has made. It's not that Angela Rayner disagrees with this, but it does mean that the barrier for success is higher than before.
Well, look, we've got plenty more to come from our expert panel, and do join the conversation as well. What are your thoughts on Andy Burnham's first big week? We've got an excellent political panel for you for our Saturday night sort of political chinwag. We've got Michael Gove, we've got Ben Judah, and we've got Anne McElvoy. Ben, let's talk to you about the appointment of Ed Miliband as Foreign Secretary. What do you read into that, and what can we expect? Do we think there is going to be a sort of significant shift in direction when it comes to foreign policy?
Ed Miliband issued quite an extensive statement for a new incoming Foreign Secretary about what his priorities would be, in which there was a very interesting sentence which began talking about the European Union and how he wanted to deepen our alliance with the EU. That's a very clear direction of travel. But before he could get to a full stop, he talks about the need to nurture our alliance with the United States, extending an olive branch of sorts towards Washington and trying to make it clear from the moment off he would not try and position himself as an anti-American foreign secretary. We've already seen him jet off, and he was quite lucky in the timing because the ASEAN summit, that's of Asian leaders and their partners, was taking place in the Philippines, where he's rattled through a lot of his major global counterparts, including Marco Rubio. And there is a little bit of common ground if you look closely into what Ed Miliband really thinks between him and the sort of Rubio worldview. So I don't know if any of you have read Go Big, Ed Miliband's sort of recent-ish book about his worldview. It actually quotes Marco Rubio talking about how deindustrialization is a national security threat. So there may be a bit of common ground there.
Ben, but come on, there is a lot of tension there, isn't there, already? I've spoken to people, who are connected to the American administration. They're not particularly glowing about Ed Miliband, particularly about oil and gas drilling and, about Syria and about the thing that got leaked about, holding off using our bases. There is going to be some friction there, is there not? Or do you think that can be kind of overcome quickly?
All of that's there. If he wants to establish common ground with the Americans, there's one place he can do it, which is around the fact that what's called Chinese overcapacity, but which is really China flooding global markets with super subsidies. It won't be able to sustain in the long run to try and knock out any other competitive poles in manufacturing, especially Europe, is a national security threat. Embrace a little bit of that tariff agenda from the United States and find a way to work with the Americans on that. He's going to have to find some areas where he can work with the United States, and that is probably the best hope he's got.
And what about Gaza? Because Andy Burnham released a statement before he became Prime Minister saying that he thought Labour had got it wrong in terms of the conflict. What do you think is going to move on that?
Well, so looking ahead, there is a window now for the Labour Party if it wants to push through what the PLP is currently demanding, which is a ban on Israeli settlement goods before the Israeli elections, which are going to take place in October, in which Netanyahu is widely expected to lose. That's what the polls are saying. And Israel's worst government in its history could be replaced by Israel's best government in its history, with two state parties and probably an Arab party as part of the coalition. There's going to be a huge effort internationally to stabilise and support that government, and anything that could undermine it would just be wrong in foreign policy terms and in foreign policy terms. Now, the question is, will Labour do it and go for a ban on Israeli settlement goods? If you look at the Irish, who are trying to do that, it's not been a free kick. You've got a lot of Congress that has come out and mobilised against them. Senators talking about the need to put sanctions on Ireland. Is that something that Labour is going to want to court? Is that something that Ed Miliband thinks he wants to add to his problems with the United States? And then there's also the very fuzzy nature of, what does one consider a settlement? The 1967 lines famously do not include the Jewish quarter of the old city of Jerusalem. Okay. So are we telling the Jewish community that if a prayer book is made in the Jewish quarter of the old city, that prayer book is banned? There's lots of problems that will come out of that, and it's not free kick.
Okay, well, that's a very useful overview of some of the big foreign policy issues on the horizon. And we obviously have been told that there's, this is a new politics, that there's, an end to factionalism. But of course, we saw, as Michael alluded to, Darren Jones's quite eyebrow-raising kind of tweet about saying that this digital ID thing was not funded, although I think that was quite a weird admission anyway. But anyway, there's clearly a lot of anger and there's kind of resentment in the backbenchers. How do you think all of that is going to pan out?
I think what will happen in the short term, I had a lot of messages, I'm sure everyone reporting on this or with political contacts around Labour. I've got quite a lot where I congratulated someone on getting a promotion, and they said, I nearly did a gendered thing there, but probably because women are just more sensitive. She just said, actually, yeah, please, like, I'm feeling a little bit nervy about this because so many people I've been working with didn't kind of make the cut this week, and I'm feeling really actually quite raw for them. So can we just not kind of go out popping the corks just yet? So I think that it has been rather traumatic, but politics is a tough old trade. Both of my fellow guests know that. Michael Gove knows it from the front lines himself. That will pass pretty quickly once the day-to-day pressures are not about how did this work out in season 2 of Labour when we moved from Keir Starmer over to Andy Burnham. It will not be how upset was everybody. It will be what you're getting on with. How can these teams gel quickly? And I do think we have seen, you have to say, all credit to Louise Haig, who's sort of a bit of a mixture, really, of, so she reminds me a bit of Marsha Falkenstein under Harold Wilson, and Barbara Castle, who is her heroine, as the former great minister of those years, of the Wilson-Callaghan years. I mean, she is butting heads together. She's showing that she wants to be in charge. She has the role that's the sort of nodes and connections role for the Burnham government. So I think that will change quickly. Then I think you do get into the fact that something has to be delivered pretty well. You've got all the challenges that Michael laid out. But I just think, you will always have a group of people who don't feel that they owe Andy Burnham much of the time of day. Because after all, they got booted at a very, very difficult time to find a job.
And look, Michael, in terms of how Andy Burnham moves forward with his new cabinet this week, in a way, was the fun week, right? This was coming in, this was hitting the ground running, and there's obviously a lot of work done on these announcements, although we still don't know how everything's going to be paid for. This was all about energy and love bombing, as you say. It will start to get more difficult from next week. There is expected to be a speech on social care, and Ben makes a really important point. The international picture is could potentially sort of kill the vibe quite quickly.
Yes. So the first thing is the economic problems that are accumulating. And as Ben alluded to, the situation in the Middle East is not particularly promising at the moment, and the ongoing conflict between the US and Iran has an impact on oil prices, supply chains, inflation. Added to that, the public finances are in quite a fragile state. Andy Burnham has ambitious economic plans. I mentioned earlier his plans on housing, particularly council housing. It's also the case that if he is going to have Yvette Cooper, the new health secretary, create a national care service alongside the National Health Service, even though you can argue that can save money in the long term, it undoubtedly costs in the short term. If you look at the tax promises that he's open to or contemplating, they're significant. And if you look at the burden of expectation within the Labour Party about what a change really means, then the task facing John Healey, who has also committed himself to dealing with the black hole in the defence budget, is pretty significant. And that, of course, will only fuel speculation about whether or not we may have an early election. So that both in terms of tax promises, but also in terms of harvesting early popularity, Andy Burnham might think it is worth going sooner rather than later. And at the moment, it certainly seems to be the case that the activity that we've been noting has led to him being the most popular of a succession of new prime ministers. The only person who came into office in recent years who was more popular on accession was, ironically, Theresa May. She miscalculated the call for an early election. That will be a warning, but it will certainly be a temptation.
And Michael, in terms of some of the other announcements that have been floated, we've heard that oil and gas drilling might be allowed. How do you think that will go down? I mean, obviously, the Conservatives did very well in Aberdeen South. That was pretty much like a sort of referendum on oil and gas drilling. What sort of signal do you think that sends if Andy Burnham and Miata Fahnbulleh, who has been against oil and gas drilling, what signal does that send if they go ahead with it?
I think it's really a way of dealing with an electoral Achilles, not heel, but leg. So in the northeast of Scotland, in Aberdeen and beyond, actually, in lots of areas, the decision to effectively cold shoulder or long finger oil and gas exploration has created problems not just for, in electoral terms, but with the trade unions. the GMB, which has long been one of the most sensible of labour trade unions, has, and it's not the only the GMB, has long thought that Ed Miliband's, as they see it, almost theological objection to further exploration of North Sea resources is bad for workers, bad for investment. And I think that Andy Burnham, while not necessarily converting into a mini drill baby drill Trump wannabe, will certainly want to show a more pragmatic approach there. And that provokes a broader question as well, which is that Andy Burnham is committed to reindustrialization. Very welcome, obviously, with trade unions. Defense provides an opportunity, but reindustrialization is very difficult with high energy costs, and that will weigh very heavily on his mind. So I suspect that what we will see is certainly an agreement to more gas extraction from the North Sea. Whether or not that extends to oil, we'll see. But a broader rethink on energy policy would probably be required in order to get the industrial revolution 3.0 that Andy Burnham is committed to. And as you quite rightly point out, that runs counter to what Miatta van Bulla has said in the past. Undoubtedly, one of the cleverest people in Parliament, but also someone who's on record as saying that Ed Miliband was insufficiently determined on net zero.
And Ben, look, in terms of the net zero debate, which kind of has become one of these very polarising, almost culture war issues, and Ed Miliband very much became the sort of lightning conductor for that. Do you think that a move towards doing some oil and gas drilling, is that going to cause problems for the more progressive flank of voters who Andy Burnham is trying to win back, and those Greens who've also been deserting Labour?
One of the things in politics is knowing when to pivot, and something that I noticed in my time as a special advisor is people often missed the international and particularly the American context and realising that it might have to make us pivot. Starmer needed to pivot in general when Trump came to power, and in particular when it became clear that Trump was personally committed to leading a global campaign against net zero, in the exact polar opposite to what Joe Biden and Jake Sullivan were doing, which was a global campaign in favour of decarbonisation and net zero. It was not appreciated quick enough that Trump had developed a pattern of using every single one of his interventions in British politics to attack net zero, attack windmills, talk about the issues that Michael just raised in the northeast of Scotland, where, of course, he has his Turnberry golf course, and in particular start to attack, and in particular get his outriders and briefers to start attacking politicians very associated with net zero, like Ed Miliband. This should have been a moment to go. Trump's come back to power. We are going to have to slow down net zero a bit. We're going to have to create some flexibility here because of how difficult the international situation is. There's a nice French expression, reculer pour mieux sauter. You've got to pull back in order to jump further. And that's what I think should have happened. Now, they can do that without breaking the manifesto. And that is by letting these two existing licenses go ahead at Jackdaw and
Rosebank.
Rosebank.
Okay, that's very interesting insight there in terms of what perhaps should have been done. Right, well, we've got plenty more to come from Michael, Ben and Anne, but back to our Saturday night political chinwag. We have assembled a brilliant cast for you tonight. We've got Michael Gove, we've got Ben Judah, and we've got Anne McElvoy, and we've got you at home as well. Thank you for all your messages coming in. Daniel has messaged in. He messaged in yesterday asking me to give a wee shout out to the Dufton Highland Games. He's messaged in to say thank you so much for mentioning them yesterday. It's been a beautiful day and most of the pipers are still standing. Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. Michael messages in with a slightly grumpy message saying, talking about the government's presentation style is really annoying. We need debate about issues, problems and solutions, not waffle about presentation or scampi versus peanuts. Well, I hope we're doing a bit of both on that, Michael. We are getting into some of the detail on that, and Mike has messaged in to say, if Burnham is on a charm offensive to reconnect with traditional Labour voters, then sooner or later he's going to have to tackle the issue of immigration. And until then, I will reserve judgment on our new Prime Minister, because vibes can only take you so far. Same for the autumn budget, which I think is an absolute sort of fair enough comment. But I feel like on bar snacks, it is a big issue. I feel I do have to ask my panel. Michael, what's the best bar snack for you? What's your best pub snack?
Straightforwardly crisps, salt and vinegar. I noticed that they had Walker's Ridged salt and vinegar in the viral video, which I think is probably the best choice, but cheese and onion, an acceptable second. Scampi and bacon fries, absolutely not, under no circumstances, both deeply offensive.
Oh, I mean, I do like a salt and vinegar crisp, but I like a bacon fry, which I know as a Muslim I'm not supposed to with my glass of wine, but let's move past that. And your pub snack of choice?
I'm trad. Definitely a pub trad wife here. I cannot bear anything that's sort of mucked around, whether it's prawn cocktail or something that describes itself as being ham and eggs. And my family decided in Spain that there's Canaries specialism in pubs and bars is fried egg crisps. So we brought back a ton of them and we served them in our garden with some people coming around for drinks. And the number of people said it was the most disgusting thing they'd ever eaten. So I don't know if any of your listeners are defenders of the great Canaries fried egg crisp. You might like to let us know. But after that, I went back, a bit like Michael, I went back to salt and vinegar. Cheese and onion if you must.
Oh, okay, that's very good. And I would have had you down as a fancy olive girl, because you're very...
Oh, yeah. I see. I didn't realise we were allowed to go beyond sort of weird hydrocarbons.
No,
I didn't realise we were allowed to do anything that actually came from a tree. Yes, you're quite right.
I
just
knew
have an
it.
olive and a very cold glass of white wine anytime you're up for it.
I'll be still my beating Waitrose heart. Ben, what's your kind of drink pub snack of choice?
Well, I did watch the Prime Minister's video of the pub snacks, and I did think, oh, well, scampi fries, that's not kosher. I've never tried that. I've got no idea what that tastes like. Bacon fries, never had that either. Don't know what that tastes like. So I think I can probably only eat one or two of the things on his list. I think it was peanuts. Those are definitely kosher. And crisps. Now, not all those kosher. You've got to be careful, but I think the ones in the video were kosher.
Okay, that's good. Well, I'm glad we've established that, Michael. Oh, someone said bacon wheat crunchies, no contest. They are good, I have to say. Right, I want to have just a bit of a chat about number 10 in the north, because Andy Byrne was very proud about that. That obviously opened yesterday. He said this is like the best day of his life. And what did you make of number 10 in the north?
I'm waiting to see what it actually is. I know that sounds a bit of sort of dumping on the Prime Minister's evident enthusiasm as someone with marriage and children whose best moment was opening up number 10 North. But clearly it means a lot to him. It's intended to be symbolic. When you looked at the jobs, as someone pointed out, the actual jobs there, it's got sort of special advisor vibes, but then how do those special advisors really relate to those doing those jobs among a very strict departmental culture and structure that we have, indeed, in which Ben is an illustrious forebear there in his role. So I'm not really convinced about what it is. They did seem to be hiring a lot of videographers. So it's a great opportunity if you're in the northwest and want to make those cute videos that the government's decided are the route to communicating with us. I think it will. I mean, what's the downside of it? I've seen broadcasters do it. It's a bit of a brass plate exercise to show. BBC, Channel 4, they've all tried to show they're going north. What you often find is people spend quite a lot of time going up and down the country on the train, so they fulfil a letter of it. So, I'm a northerners, I'm a northeasterners. I'm always a bit jealous if something happens the other side of the Pennines. But just colour me a bit sceptical at the moment.
I mean, we've got mixed views from our listeners. Many of them are a bit sceptical. Michael, you were a big fan of devolution. That was something that you were very much part of. And a lot of your, people like George Osborne, it's not just Labour that has, championed devolution, Michael Heseltine. What did you think about the concept of this?
I'm all in favour. I know the natural thing is to be cynical. I'm not saying that Anne was. I think Anne was quite rightly pointing out that some of the first jobs that have been advertised have been media roles. But I'm not saying that this we were a big success. But when we were in government, Rishi Sunak relocated a significant part of the Treasury to Darlington. But when I was a Cabinet Office Minister, we opened Cabinet Office North in Glasgow. We relocated part of the Home Office to Stoke-on-Trent. And there are at least three virtues. One, if you're a talented wannabe or existing civil servant, it should not be the case that you have to be in London for your career. The second thing is that inevitably, civil service Whitehall expenditure is part of what the government does in order to, take tax money and provide opportunities for people. Why should that be concentrated so much just in London and in the southeast? And then the third thing, which is related to that, is that every decision that governments make have a direct impact on the citizenry. And the closer that decision makers are to the people whom those decisions affect, the better. It may end up being a gimmick, but I emphatically think it's the right thing to do.
How interesting. I was expecting you to be a bit more sceptical about it, but that is that is interesting. I mean, a few people have been messaging in. Richard, let me know, is this Richard who I used to work with at the Department of Trade and Industry many years ago? He says, hi Ayesha, please find out where Andy Burnham thinks the North is. Is it halfway between Land's End and John O'Groats? Is it halfway to Berwick, or is it defined by some measure of economic performance, the unemployment rate, the average wages? In which case, various parts of London and other major towns, together with coastal communities in the south, the southwest, and eastern England, should also be included. And that is a point that a few people have made. I mean, Ben, what are your thoughts on this? Because, I mean, the idea is very good, but doesn't it come down to the effectiveness of actual decisions getting made regardless of the postcode?
I mean, politically, it's a great idea. A lot of people vote for reform because they feel that Labour's become too metropolitan and is not listening to them in the north of England. What a huge symbol. I think it's really powerful. I think that devolution can be really good symbolically and politically of people thinking that they can get things back into their hands. And I think in the long run, it can be good economically as regions become more competitive with one another. But you've got to actually allow them to compete with one another, which means you've got to allow them to become more unequal with each other. At least in the short run, sort of growth begins to lift all boats. Now, are we actually going to do that? I don't know. What actual fiscal levers are we giving these regions? I don't know.
That presumably means as well, how much will John Healey be prepared to give substantive tax autonomy to mayors?
Yeah, and even if it does work, and I think that, a lot of studies showing that devolution does work, but it's only in the long run and not by a huge amount. So it's not really a growth strategy. So I think that we need to hear more from Burnham about exactly how he's going to make the country grow. And for me, one of the things that is very important for Labour to think about is not just where can we redistribute taxes or where can we increase taxes. It's how are we going to make sure that companies in this country that people work for and then pay tax are thriving? How can we get more successful companies? Where are companies that we can promote? It's not just a question of glittering AI companies. There's all kinds of opportunities up and down the country.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are really hoping, but a lot of people are actually very enthusiastic about this idea of re-industrialising and a proper industrial strategy, which does bring more back on shore and lots more support. I have some
thoughts about that.
Yeah, go on briefly. Yeah.
It's a really powerful, nostalgic statement. We can make the world of tomorrow more like the world of yesterday, but no Western government for the last 20 years, where different politicians have been promising reindustrialization, has managed to pull it off. Now, most people don't want to go back to work in factories. Factories today actually employ very few people. They are, about to get even more robotized. So even if we increase the amount of factories in this country by multiple folds, we're not going to see a return to that factory working class eating, scampy fries in the pub. So we need to think about people who work in services as well, and a future in which most people are just going to work in services companies in this country.
Okay, Michael, that's a really good point that Ben makes, and actually a couple of our listeners have asked that question. The idea of reindustrialisation sounds great, but Ben is right. That is it's not necessarily going to match up with the optic that we've got in our heads, right? And we've had politicians say, reindustrialisation means, all these kind of great jobs for people and loads more jobs and really good paid jobs. It might not quite pan out like that.
Well, it's certainly the case, Ben is right, that we're not going to see a return to the 1950s and 1960s. We're not going to see the return of Ravenscraig, the Linwood car factory, and the Clyde resounding to the ring of hammer against metal as the finest ships in the world are produced by Scots Riveters. No, that won't happen. But what can happen is that in a variety of areas, in defence, in artificial intelligence, in
renewable energy,
and indeed energy overall, we can build on some existing UK strengths and successes. But there are two critical things, and again, Ben touched on them. One is that some of our existing manufacturing, in fact, most of our existing manufacturing is energy intensive, and we have very high energy costs. The second thing, critically, and again, Ben alluded to it as well, are the skills and training required in order to make the most of these opportunities. Again, Andy Burnham has talked about the vital importance of vocational and technical education, but without wanting to get into boring detail here, this is an area that has eluded successive governments when it comes to setting sufficiently high and rigorous standards and making sure that we've got, whether it's in further education or elsewhere, the trained workforce we need.
And all of this points to the bigger, thornier question of what is this big plan going to be, particularly about growth. And that's where the budget's going to tell that story of how we're going to get growth in every postcode and how we're going to sort of stimulate the economy. I mean, what do you think they will be thinking in terms of timing of the budget? Because that is going to tell the critical story of what the economics of this Burnham government's going to set out.
Yeah, in many ways, a lot of things we've talked about will be probably a bit for the birds when we get through that first budget. And I think they will go as early as they can. I think they have to give 6 weeks, don't they, to the ABR finish. So I think it'll be in October budget. You can pretty much figure it out from then within a few days or a week or so. But I think the interesting thing, apart from the timing, which I think will be soon, some people say, well, we'll know then if he's going for an early election. My gut is still very against that. I think you spent all this time getting there, throwing the cards up in the air, and Reform are a bit down on their luck right now, but you never really know what's going to happen until you get into a campaign. So I think this budget is intended really to lay also a chance for John Healey to solve the exam question he's been given, which was you complained you walked out because you couldn't get the defence investment plan through. Okay, so we've got a neat idea. Right, you did repeat at the top, which I think is becoming a sort of fable, that it was unpredicted about John Healey, very immodestly, as you know, as we're all immodest. We predicted it on Sam and Anne. So it was very clear that John Healey had been trying to become Chancellor for a very long time. If you actually look at his interactions with the Treasury, the way he handled some things, sometimes to his credit and sometimes to leaning back from an argument until it all couldn't be contained. So there's John Healey. He has to solve that problem. The other thing everyone's mentioned is growth in every postcode. A very intriguing conversation with someone at the House of Government on this. He said, well, I said, how on earth you can do that? I come from DH990H, Stanley County, Durham. I doubt that it's going to be, it's not going to be the hub of AI. You might have other things that you can do. But they said, well, actually what we mean is opportunity in every postcode. So I think we'll see quite a lot of fudging and mudging of what we mean by growth in every postcode. And what they mean is, will people feel better off in every postcode? But, you have to be careful with these. They sound like great phrases, but be quite careful that people take them literally and then you're not able to deliver on them. But yes, spreading growth across the country. I think we're all still a little bemused as to what without more supply side reform, without bringing more investment, doing some things that don't fit so well with a centre-left perspective that Andy Burnham has. We haven't heard yet how far he's prepared to go on that score. So again, we're optimistic for his personal smarts and charm, reserve judgment on the rest.
And in terms of some of the difficult things he's going to have to do, the less feel-good things, I mean, the two obvious ones are, one of our listeners, Mike, alluded to it, immigration and, of course, welfare. And he has alluded to this Alan Milburn report. He's very much framing the welfare reform in terms of wanting to help young people into work, which is something I'm sure we would all agree with. But, Michael, how do you see him navigating those more difficult areas which will cause friction with some Labour backbenchers?
Well, I think the first thing is that on immigration and, as it happens, crime, I don't think that Andy Burnham is held back by any of the sort of matrix chamber, human rights barrister views that Keir Starmer was. I think that he is, if not conservative, certainly within Labour terms, quite right-wing on those issues. I don't think he's got a hang-up with taking a tough line on crime, as his backing of Stephen Watson, the Chief Constable in Greater Manchester, has shown. And I don't think he's got a particular problem in taking a tough line on migration either. I think where he's on the left is economically, not on these home affairs issues. So it's already the case, as Fraser Nelson points out in the Times today, that migration has fallen, I would argue, as a result of policies put in place by James Cleverly, but never mind who is responsible for the policies. It is falling. It is becoming slightly less salient as an issue. Andy Burnham will want to reinforce that. On welfare, he has a big opportunity because Alan Milburn has defined the issue essentially as the wastage of human talent, particularly amongst young people, rather than an exercise in saving money narrowly. So there is an opportunity there, but it will require skill. But you are absolutely right, Ayesha. The problem is not so much necessarily with Andy Burnham. The problem is with the rest of the Labour Party, because we know that on migration, there are at least 80 Labour MPs who are unhappy, even with Shabana Mahmood's relatively modest changes to indefinite leave to remain. And on welfare, well, that was the biggest source of angst for Starmer with the Labour Party. Now, however, Andy Burnham has in his government some of the people who were responsible for that rebellion, including Louise Haigh.
And Ben, in terms of those two issues, how do you think he will navigate? I mean, I feel on welfare, because Alan Milburn has done a very good job of sort of reframing this debate in terms of Labour values, helping young people into work, that. And even some of the rebels like Meg Hillier said that she wouldn't push back this time. I feel like on welfare, it might be, although I don't think what will be delivered is going to deliver huge cost savings up front. But immigration is going to be more tricky, Ben, isn't it? And I've already spoken to particularly people in the Lords who have said that they will absolutely push back against Shabana Mahmood on this. What's your sense on how tricky that will be? Ben?
On welfare, I am sceptical that the government is going to be able to make a major dent pulling that bill down. I think that what it can probably achieve is something capping it and stopping it from spiraling ever upwards. I think that they feel they don't have political space to take things away from people, but they do have space to stop people getting new things. So I could see some kind of reform passing that stops, new transfers or freezes some kind of payments. But I don't see people actually, be they pensioners or young people with mental health problems or people receiving housing benefits. I don't see people who've got something that being taken away, because that politically for them is the main lesson they've learned from the mood swing against Starmer and Reeves that began with Winterfuel. On migration, I think that Shabana Mahmood has shown she's very good at winning the right-wing press behind her and playing to that gallery. So I think if there is a serious threat to those reforms, you'll see a lot of support for her surge out of those quarters. And I think that probably the majority of Labour MPs back the reforms and understand them. They just prefer to keep quiet about it. And I think if there was ever a serious sense that they were it was being completely thrown off track, I think you'd hear a little bit more from them.
Interesting. I mean, I think there may be more pushback on that, although I think she has started quite high to negotiate down a bit. And what are your thoughts on the Shabana Mahmood and what lies ahead for her?
I think the way it will head, and as you mentioned, that colleagues in the Lords who also are prepared to fight on against some aspects. So I think Shabana went into, she really wanted to send the signal, and I think Andy Burnham broadly supports her. Keir Starmer came to a position of support. Things had to be a lot clearer. It had to be clear to the public at large where Labour stood on immigration and asylum, in the sense that it wanted a lot less of both of them. Right? And that was a position which I think was very difficult for a lot of people in the Labour Party. I was just reflecting today, thinking about, I happened to be speaking to someone I've known for a lot of years. I remember was a major, sort of very Labour-aligned official who said to me when the boats were coming on the south coast of England, when the numbers, and I said, what are we going to do about this? She said, well, we didn't know anything about it. It's not many. And I think there was a real denial at how important this would be in Labour, and that this would also be seen, even in parts, and people used to use this very annoying argument that elites use, that in other parts of the countries, in the northeast of England, away from the coast or whatever, it's not relevant. Why are we, but in fact, it was relevant to people. I do think on indefinite leave to remain, for people who got their permissions to stay, and who have been building up their lives here and their family lives and trying to get the working lives and be in the tax system after the so-called Boris wave, I think she might have to give some ground there. Actually, I do think Angela Rayner and others have pointed to that, rather than Angela Rayner, strangely, is actually a mixture. She's quite tough on overall immigration, I think, for the same reason that Andy Burnham is. If you represent working class communities, you know that.
Okay.
But I'm not sure, actually. I think she may have to give a little on that. Can they find some form of small compromise?
I suspect that is going to be the direction of travel. Well, we have reached the end of our time together. What a fabulous panel with Michael, Ben and Anne.